He made a very good point about the previous leadership teams at United, such as the ones headed up by Ed Woodward, but he cannot criticise the Glazers, and that's the thing that is always going to alienate United fans.
Jim Ratcliffe has had his say on the past, present and future of Manchester United following a highly publicised protest before a promising performance against Arsenal. We're going to touch on all of that ahead of a vital European outing under Old Trafford lights. It is your latest episode of the Theatre of Red. So, following a tremendous public display of disdain for the Glazer family and their hideous mismanagement of the world's most beloved sporting institution, Ruben Amorim's Manchester United delivered another example of their capabilities to deal with a tough task in a 1-1 draw with Arsenal. In response, Sir Jim Ratcliffe delivered a set of tell-all interviews with a selection of publications, from The Overlap to The Times, The Telegraph, and one of the homes of my good buddy and guest with the BBC, Mr. Dominic. How are you doing on this lovely morning, sir?
Yeah, good, thank you, Shaun. How are you?
I'm doing very well. All the better to be speaking with you on this fine day. Now, Dominic, I had a quick look. We last spoke in June of 2024 on the Theatre of Red. I think it's fair to say that a little bit has changed in this time at Old Trafford. We've gone from ecstasy in a memorable FA Cup outing at Wembley to the departure of Erik ten Hag, the arrival of Ruben Amorim, and a sense of disenchantment already building from subsections a little over 3 months into his tenure. Sunday unveiled a sublime showing of United Reds march through the city in protest of the idle American owners and the club's attack on fan culture amidst the appalling times for the Manchester faithful. The 1958 set about delivering an unavoidable message to the Glazers, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, and the world that the working class lifeblood of this once proud football club will not be trodden on by the feet of disinterested wealthy. Although some may choose to disregard the concerns of the supporter base, the internal hemorrhaging was laid bare for all to see the following day. And now we will get to that very shortly. But before we do, what were your thoughts on what you saw before a ball was kicked against Arsenal on Sunday with the protests?
Yeah, it was a strong display, wasn't it? And it's funny that we've landed in this position given what's happened over the last couple of years with the change of ownership, at least the new ownership model with Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos coming in, and the optimism that surrounded that. I can't remember exactly what we said last time I was on the show, but I think we probably spoke about it in fairly positive terms. There are obviously major issues for Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos to solve when they came into United, but that we've seen such a display of protests this early in their tenure is illustrative of how many mistakes they've made, of the fact that the Glazers are still embedded in the club and are pretty much impossible to get out. And obviously the performances on the pitch and the state of the squad, the fans aren't fools. They see exactly the state of all that. And there we have what we saw before the Arsenal game. And, I think fans have absolutely every right to protest. I'm kind of surprised it has taken this long, to be honest, given the situation on and off the pitch at the club. It's taken this long to protest. And I think it's going to be the start of something rather than a one-off. I can see it happening again at some point. I can see this rumbling on and on until Sir Jim Ratcliffe addresses some of these key issues. And I know we're going to get onto him addressing issues in this raft of interviews that he's done probably later on, but that scratches the surface. It's about actions, not words, and that does smack a little bit of a PR stunt to me. In response to the protests and in response to his name being sung alongside the Glazers in a negative way by fans outside Old Trafford. That's quite stunning, I think, given where we've come from, that's happened already.
It's very, very clear when you're outside the ground on a regular basis, when you're inside the ground on a weekly basis. Sir Jim is not escaping the brunt of the supporter frustration, and he's very much aware of what's occurring. And obviously we saw as well social videos that arose that day where he thought people wanted to sign for a picture and an autograph, and he popped down the window of his car and he was immediately subjected to visceral abuse that was laid out by a disgruntled supporter base. This is something that I don't think he even comprehended that he was going to be receiving so early into his tenure, because it is just a year into this at this stage. It spread into the stadium at Old Trafford. Old Trafford felt like that Coliseum of old, with a backdrop of noise to rival any stadium in world football on Sunday against Arsenal. And just focusing on the football for a moment before we deviate off that, we saw an injury-ravaged starting 11 take the field against Arsenal. And despite sitting deep for much of that first half, Amorim set out a strict game plan that worked perfectly against Arteta's side, with a free-flowing transition in the second that left Sir Jim with visions of what this side can achieve with the correct support. Bruno Fernandes was once more integral, earning yet another highlight moment with his exquisite free kick. But the performances of the likes of Lenny Yoro before his knock, Nazir Mazraoui, Matthias de Ligt, Alejandro Garnacho, and also a memorable Premier League debut for Aidan Heaven, earning a standing ovation from many in the ground, leaving a feeling that maybe this group can carry a stirring performance into Thursday's meeting with Sociedad.
Yeah, and I think that those green shoots of progress have been evident in the past few performances. That's not a particularly fashionable thing to say, especially from the neutrals about Ruben Amorim's United. It's an easy stick to beat them with, and the league position is obviously way below what anyone would expect of Manchester United. But I think one of the only key points, one of the only points that I really agreed with in Sir Jim's interviews was that I think Amorim's actually doing a very decent job with the tools at his disposal, and his stubbornness, if you like, his dogmatic approach, sticking with the 3-4-3 system come hell or high water, I think is starting to pay off a little bit, and it certainly pays off in these games against the bigger and better sides where United's defensive structure is really, really strong. We saw that away at the Emirates in the FA Cup. We saw that at Liverpool. United should have won that Liverpool game. They did win at the Emirates on penalties, and they should have won on Sunday. Like, let's make no bones about it. Arsenal dominated the game for the first half, but they didn't create too many chances. And United had the much better chances in the second half and should have won it with virtually the last kick of the game had it not been for some David Raya heroics. So, yeah, I think it was positive. And I found the narrative after this game from some United fans and some pundits a little odd, that they've been criticising Amorim for supposedly parking the bus. I don't know what they expect of this United side. They're not in a position to go and dominate the second best team in the country. They're not in a position to dominate the ball and to play some sort of intricate attacking football to blow these sides away. It was a perfectly reasonable approach, and one that should have paid off a little bit more. So, yeah, I'm positive about the Arsenal game, and I think that the performance for 70 minutes against Real Sociedad in the first leg was along the same lines too. Previously against Fulham, I think there were good moments in that game. There were also less good moments, but on the pitch we're all learning lessons for next season, right? It's not, apart from the Europa League, it's not the most crucial thing here and now, but we do want to see green shoots, like I said. And I think we are starting to see some. It's been slow progress, don't get me wrong, but we can start to see them, I think. I don't know if you agree.
No, I do agree. And it's something that I was speaking about with a couple of friends after the game on Sunday. When you look at 2025, since we turned January, there's been 15 fixtures. Performances have obviously not been great in a whole lot of them. But there's only been, I think, 3 or 4 fixtures where United have actually lost them in 90 minutes of football. You know, I mean, there's been a lot of draws there, Dominic, but performances are there. United are getting, they're obviously tricky to beat, particularly against the bigger sides. It's the same old issues that have surfaced over multiple seasons, that the issues actually start occurring when you go out against the would-be lesser sides that United, I suppose, historically should be going out and beating 3-4 or 5-0 and building up a solid goal difference against. That doesn't exist anymore. Green shoots is the only thing that matters in this. It's something we've been saying for every single manager post Sir Alex Ferguson. As long as you can see progress, it used to be on an annual basis that we used to say this. As long as you could see progress on an annual basis, then you knew the manager, the head coach and a team was going in the right direction. But it's when you start seeing any sort of a decline that's when you start to have a worry. Now, obviously, United has undergone such a traumatic period over the last 2 decades of financial mismanagement and complete mismanagement from the Glazers. The goalposts have shifted. It's not an annual discussion. It's more so a monthly and sometimes even a weekly discussion as to what we're seeing from the football club. And the reason that I wanted to discuss Arsenal before getting into the big conversation about Sir Jim is because it all ties in with Ruben Amorim. We're a little over the years since the billionaire completed his minority purchase of the club, and he assumed control of sporting operations and set the standards high with the prospect of a best-in-class backroom team to assist his head coach. Now, since then, the 72-year-old obviously held his hand up for errors in retaining Erik ten Hag, in pursuing Dan Ashworth, and even not considering the prospect of holding functions to support players' foundations to the sum of £40,000. We see the club occupying 14th in the table, and he's told Gary Neville that things have gone largely as anticipated and that challenging decisions have had to be made to return the club to its former glories. However, his support of Ruben Amorim is about one of the only points that has been universally applauded by the supporter base. It brought me back to something that I sent back out into social worlds this morning, that on December the 17th, we broke an exclusive about how the Ineos hierarchy opted to forego their predetermined visions in their venture into having an established playing style because they bought into the vision that was supplied by Ruben Amorim upon those early discussions in trying to lure him from Sporting. Now, when you take Ratcliffe's assessment regarding the limitations on the number of players that are unavailable currently, coupled with poor recruitment and the necessity to allow time for his unique style and his philosophy to boom, and he also referenced the fact that they need to acquire players to back this vision, it is entirely evident, Dominic, that the backroom team are indeed tied to Ruben Amorim. When you look at the entire situation as a whole, I think a pragmatic supporter, a logical supporter can look at the situation, can see a very talented young head coach coming into a brand new league mid-season. And just like any of the players, take Joshua Zirkzee as an example, you're going to need time to acclimatise to your new surroundings, let alone what you're having to encounter on the pitch. You have to come to your surroundings in terms of just your general lifestyle. Everything from food and travel and climate. But there's some supporters, and I think there's this convoluted ideal there, that people fall back in this bedrock of we've allowed our standards to slip so much that we accept mediocrity. I don't believe it is that. I think it's more so a realization that in order to be able to return to the fulcrum of what we want to, there has to be a period where we almost accept the fact that we're just not very good, and it takes time to be able to morph into this. When you categorize what Jim Ratcliffe is saying about Amorim and I suppose his public support of the coach, what he's had to deal with, and that he thinks he's doing a relatively good job based on the mitigating factors surrounding him, what is your feeling regarding what you've seen from Amorim and how he's handled players like Rashford, to everything to his time with the media and the continuation of his playing system amidst such scrutiny in Manchester?
Yeah, I think there was a point a couple of months ago after some really poor performances and damaging defeats. I'm thinking the home defeats against Brighton, Palace, I think a little earlier than that, Newcastle and Bournemouth. United were absolutely listless in those games, and the 3-4-3 systems just seemed like it was never going to work. The squad looked short after the January window in allowing Rashford and Anthony to go out on loan. Dorgu, was an untested player, and the only arrival and the only person who seemed to be sort of a bespoke signing by Amorim. So it looked really desperate, and I think there were large cries for people for Amorim to change the system and to basically go away from his principles and his ideology of football. And I'm so glad that he hasn't, because I think that is the thing that will define him at United, and the thing that, like you said, a lot of his predecessors they didn't do. They didn't stick to an ideology. They adapted. They chased results because they were fearful for their job and the pressure got too much. Thankfully, things, like you say, Sir Jim Ratcliffe has completely stuck by Amorim and will continue to do so. Even in these recent interviews, he was suggesting Amorim basically has as much time as he likes to get this right, which might be slightly inaccurate. I think there'll have to be a limit to that if results are really, really poor next season. But I just like the way he speaks, Amorim. I like that, like you say, the way he deals with the media. He doesn't pull punches. He's as honest as he possibly can be as Manchester United manager of the media. You can't be 100% honest, but he gives as much as he possibly can. He doesn't rant and rave about referees after matches. He doesn't give excuses. He doesn't palm the fans off with excuses about injuries. He's never mentioned the injury list that he has. He's never really given that as an excuse why United have played poorly in games. And he could easily have done, because his injury list has been just as bad as the one that Erik ten Hag went on and on about last season. So all of this builds up to a pretty impressive character. And that's why the fans are so firmly behind Amorim. There might be division at the club. There might be protests. There might be, an appalling league position, appalling performances earlier this season. But the fans realise that this guy he needs to be backed. He is here for the long term. And by backing Amorim, I think the fans are telling Sir Jim Ratcliffe what they want him to do. And they're telling the players, you have to buck up, because we are not going to turn on this manager. We are going to give this manager all the time he needs. So the players are the ones who are dispensable. They are the ones who could easily be sold in the summer. I mean, how many of them could be sold in the summer? As many. How long have you got? As many as you like, other than maybe a handful. So that's where we are with Amorim. And yeah, I as a fan of United, I really like the guy. The only thing is, and maybe we could talk about this a little bit, is the perception of Amorim from the outside. People, other fans, other pundits, those outside United are giving him a lot of criticism. And I think that shows us, again, don't want to be obnoxious, it shows a slight lack of understanding about where United are in the project, in the process, as we say.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I think that ties hand in hand with this whole adage that we have that paper will never refuse ink. And obviously Manchester United is just the most desirable, click-worthy source of media and attention that you're going to get on socials. But two of the main things that really sort of came out regarding Amorim with this conversation with Sir Jim ties in with the players that you've said. When Gary Neville, will say, for one, asked Radcliffe about how he felt about Anthony, Sancho, Rashford departing the club, did the manager do the right thing? He immediately backed the manager. So that ties in with what you're saying, that he's sticking to the manager and that the players are no longer getting a free pass in this. It also ties into the fact, and as well, it was obviously well documented early on. He didn't bring Ten Hag to the football club. His best-in-class Ineos team didn't bring Ten Hag to the football club, and that a decision would be made collectively as to whether he was going to stay at the end of the season. He was very quick to come out and say that Omar Barada, Jason Wilcox, and himself made the decision to bring Ruben Amorim to the football club. You have to look deeper within the conversation, because he referenced the fact that he played a large part with Dan Ashworth coming, and that he couldn't live with the decision to keep him there, and he couldn't look by it. So he thought that despite the criticism that he would inevitably receive, that it was better to sever ties. He's taken the exact same stance with Amorim, and he remains fully committed to him. What do you think about him saying that, I suppose, ascertains that at this moment in time, the club is where they more or less expect it to be, and that things are going exactly as they anticipated within 12 months? Because they hardly anticipated the club being as low as they are in the table after 12 months, regardless of everything that's occurring.
Yeah, I think that's kidology. I think that's adapting to the situation. It stems, I think, again, talk about Amorim and the ruthless decisions that he has made, jettisoning Rashford and Anthony, and then the club opting not to really replace them in the January window. So the club have obviously adapted their approach as the season have gone on. They've seen that results have been poor. They've written off the league campaign, which is fine, and they're going to regroup in the summer when they hope that the financial decisions that they've made can put them in a stronger position to reinvest in the squad. And so that's kind of fair enough. And so maybe in the context of all of that and changing his approach, not on ad hoc basis, but just as and when these things have happened, I think it's kind of fair enough. But there's no way they expected United to be 14th in the table at this point. They should have been prepared to accept that situation once they renewed Erik ten Hag's contract, because that was a big mistake. And the Ashworth mistake I can forgive more than the Ten Hag one. Ashworth, I think Sir Jim said there was a chemistry problem between Ashworth and himself and the rest of the leadership team. That's the kind of thing you can't foresee, but you can see the kind of football that Erik ten Hag's United were playing last season, and you must know that is unsustainable, and then you must make that change. United finished 8th last season, but I think the XG and the expected points had them in the bottom half, which is where they are now. And actually, I think United are in a slightly false position now where they could be a little bit higher. So what's been the difference really is that this season to last? Has this season been far, far worse than last? Probably not, I think, on performances. I think it's been similar. And you factor in that Amarin's had a whole new system to implement, then that Ten Hag decision is the one that stands out as just a huge error from Ineos, and one that the club financially and from a footballing perspective have yet to recover from.
Yeah, precisely. And something that I can never get over with. We spoke last June, and I kept the same stance with you as I do with everybody, that I try to give the full backing to every manager, coach, players at the football club, because as I said last week, I use this stance that we have to support our own, because everybody outside of Manchester United, as you reference, even with pundits, they'll go out of their way to get their pound of flesh in any manner they can by lamenting and bemoaning performances and credibility of individuals at the football club. The most unavoidable topic with Erik ten Hag is that he came with a distinctive philosophy, just as Ruben Amorim did. And he deviated from that philosophy after 2 games because he whittled to the pressures of the inevitable requirements of getting results at Manchester United. Whereas Amorim has taken an entirely different approach, and he's looking at it that I want something to be real. I want to build something that I know is successful and I know can help to lead this club back to where it deserves to be. But the main foundation of all, and it's something that you've referenced at the very end there, is the finances. And outside of the unforgivable debt, with annual interest repayments of £35 million, which is just hideous. You then have the 80 odd million to be paid out during the summer for previous acquisitions that Sir Jim Ratcliffe didn't necessarily come across overly pleased about. You've got decisions to cut staff lunches. You've player funds and a mountain of redundancies. The billionaire has referenced taking care of the pennies to eventually count the pounds. His entire backdrop for everything is the grizzled determination to return the club to where it belongs competitively. And they want to achieve this with tailored signings and state-of-the-art infrastructure befitting the biggest club in the world. However, I always find that when billionaires begin playing with their toys, the humble working class roots are often disregarded, and the normal Joe, who is, as I said, the lifeblood of this club, is the one who has to take the brunt of the pain. We've seen a removal of concessions alongside ticket price hikes, and now the promise of further increases. And we've also seen a reference to Ratcliffe's interpretations of what a true supporter is. I don't quite know what he was aiming for with that, because it really didn't make a whole lot of sense. And there is now a genuine worry about the prospect of individuals losing their season tickets. Friends I've spoken to have this genuine worry about losing their season tickets because of an inability to appease this nonsensical ideal about what a supporter should be and how they should proceed. It all stems from the common topic that billionaires live on a different planet from all of us. And they can often unintentionally say things that appear normal to them without actually realizing the damage of their words. When Neville asked if he understood why supporters were protesting, the fulcrum of his understanding resided in a poor season and the league standing. And that scares the hell out of supporters, Dom. And it comes across as tone deaf to many. I'm aware that there is only so much that he can say about the Americans.
I was going to just cut in and say that about the Glazer family, and he is hamstrung by that. But that's the bit that really gets under the skin of supporters when he is seen to be an ally of the Glazers, and that's the chant that's going round again. Don't need to word that chant, but it's about Jim Ratcliffe and the Glazers, and it's about the alliance between the two. And that was the biggest problem for me in that set of interviews. And he was unable and unwilling to hang the Glazers out to dry. He made a very good point about the previous leadership teams at United, such as the ones headed up by Ed Woodward and then John Murtaugh, and the mistakes they made and the overspend. That was bang on. I had no problem with that. But he cannot criticise the Glazers, and that's the thing that is always going to alienate United fans.
It is, and you see, it ties in with this ideology that would be fantastic if he could just clear the debt. Just come in, you have loads of money, so use some of the money to clear the debt, and then the issue is solved. But that's not how billionaires make their money. As you just highlighted, that with him referencing the damage caused over the past 2 decades with different management teams, and also referencing the possibility of running out of money in November, December. I mean, he's painting a pretty obvious issue, and you just have to read between the lines for the disdain that he clearly holds for the individuals who cause these issues. I'm not saying that he's free from blame by any stretch of the imagination, and I do wish that he could just come out and say things as they were, but we know that there's contracts. You know, there's stuff that he can and cannot say, and particularly as a minority owner in this with aspirations towards pursuing a majority ownership of the football club, because that exists. When I analyse these SEC filings and I look at the situation as it is, Dominic, I don't see why he would go to the hassle of doing what he has done. It's what I've said for several weeks. I said it to Jamie Jackson a couple of weeks ago. I can't, for the life of me, understand why he would put himself through the torment that he is. And he even referenced this, that he doesn't like coming back to Manchester and receiving the abuse that he's getting, like even down to the point where he said he used to like picking up a croissant and a paper in the morning, and now he can't even do that because he's subjected to a daily battering. Do you believe that he still sees a pathway towards eventual majority ownership, and that is the bedrock of why he's putting himself through this torment and the abuse that he's also referencing?
I mean, I honestly don't know. It's hard to read into his words and see that. It's really difficult, and the fact that the Glazers have been so hard to remove for so long, you continually doubt whether they're ever going to be willing to give up their majority sharehold. And United are now in this strange position where the majority shareholders are completely absent, and they're being run by a minority shareholder and his company. So yeah, when it happened, we were all hopeful that would mean some change, and that would mean that the Glazers aren't the decision makers at the club, which was a generally positive thing. But it is turning out to be problematic in its own way, isn't it? And so Jim Ratcliffe, everyone hoped he would be this benevolent owner who would just pump money into the club, like you say. But like you say, billionaires don't behave like that. They don't just give up a load of money and are happy to lose it all. That's just not the way of the world. And I know there was chat about a Qatari bid for United. Where I honestly don't know how close that was to coming to fruition. There was some major doubts about that. Maybe that could have delivered the kind of ownership that fans have been wanting, but it came with a whole heap of issues, ethical issues, human rights issues. So we are here, by hook or by crook, this is how we got here. And the only hope is that Sir Jim Ratcliffe's approach, which has been very, very unpopular, if it pays dividends in the future, if it brings a league title and success under Ruben Amorim, then it will be worth it, I suppose.
That's exactly it. It's short-term pain, long-term gain. And I know you referenced what I was saying about the billionaires, but God, if only there was some sort of an amazing philanthropist. Like there's a local university in Ireland. It's one of the biggest universities, the University of Limerick. It's in County Limerick down the south of Ireland. And there was this American philanthropist called Chuck Feeney, I believe is his name. He had so much money, he didn't know what to do with it, but he would come and he would just laud investment and just give money. And this was a multi-millionaire who used to go around with, I think, like a $20 digital wristwatch on him because it wasn't all about money. So maybe we need to start putting feelers out for individuals like that because given what we know regarding the public placement of finances in recent months, coupled with Sir Jim's revealing information, it just leads me towards the performance plan installed regarding the very real possibility of a no first team participation in European competition for a couple of seasons. The club are now bracing themselves for this and nothing has been taken for granted. However, despite injuries and off the field trauma and financial woe to write several pornographic novellas about. There was a hint of a change in momentum throughout that second half of the weekend fixture with Arsenal, and confidence is quietly building ahead of Thursday's return fixture with Real Sociedad. This is a side, Dom, who have never scored against United from open play, and they can count themselves very lucky still to be in the tie after a combination of poor finishing and a helping hand from the officials in Spain. Nothing is ever taken for granted with this team anymore, but a win leads to the last 8, and when you're in it, there is every chance in a one-off game. How are you feeling ahead of the latest Spanish arrival in Manchester on Thursday?
Yeah, I think the United have a really good chance. Like you say, I wasn't particularly impressed with Real Sociedad in that first leg at all. The last 20 minutes, they generated some momentum. Like you say, thanks to a little help from the officials, and the whipped up home crowds seemingly got behind them, and also thanks to United's poor mentality and inability to deal with an adverse situation against them in that penalty. United wilted. But before that, United had been the dominant force by far, and you would think with the home crowd at Old Trafford on Thursday night that United can perform to a similar standard to that first 70 minutes. I just hope that there is some positivity in the crowd and the fans can create a good, supportive atmosphere for the players. It could be a really good European night if that happens. Obviously, you can't trust the United team to perform in any game. That's the worry every supporter has going into every single game at the moment. And especially against a team like Real Sociedad, who you'd think would probably defend quite deep and frustrate United, play on United's inability to fashion and finish chances, which has been an ongoing problem, especially in recent months with the 2 non-scoring strikers that we have. So I'm quietly optimistic to summarise. It's a long way off actually winning the Europa League. And like you say, there's so many hurdles to overcome. What one-off games have been this team's forte in the past couple of years. Think about the FA Cup and the League Cup under Erik ten Hag. Whether that can be repeated, it's just a huge, huge thing for the football club if it can. Financially, football perspective, fans, morale, yeah, it all rests on the Europa League. I'm excited for it. I think Thursday night should be an interesting night.
I would agree with you. And given the inevitable financial implications for lack of qualification and the need for a statement from this group, many for their careers, this will no doubt be a highly charged evening at Old Trafford. Just quickly, what's your score? What are you going to go for?
It'll be close because every single United game is close now.
So 7-0.
7-0. It's more likely to say the Real Sociedad. 2-1 to United and sneak through.
Damn, we will take that. As always, my man, I know you're busy. It's a pleasure chatting. What have you got coming up in your world?
Well, it mainly revolves around my 3-month-old son at the moment. But I'm actually at Everton this weekend on Saturday, covering Everton against West Ham. So, yeah, that should be good fun. One of the last games at Goodison, so that should be good fun.
Yeah, you get your own little unique piece in history there. It'll be an interesting game as well. And if anybody wants to drop you a message, say hello, how can they do so? Well,
I prefer Blue Sky these days, so find me on Blue Sky rather than the other one that we don't talk about.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. As always, you can connect with us at theatre_of_red across every social. We don't discriminate. And subscribe wherever you're listening today. If you use Spotify, can I ask you to take 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review? Each one helps the show massively, and it would mean the world to little old me. We will be back next week to unwrap another week in the soap opera of Manchester United and what we hope is another memorable European night under Old Trafford lights. Catch you all then.